Before the time of Genshin, Star Rail, and Triple Z was a simpler time indeed. Honkai Impact III represents a small indie company's journey to becoming one of the major powerhouses in the gacha industry. And I wanted to find out, how do they do it, and is this game actually any good today? It's always a trip when playing these older games, as this one took me quite a while to get accustomed to its gameplay loop and progression. Welcome to the 6th volume of the Atrocious Gacha Reviews. Over the past 30 days, I have had the privilege to dive into the Honkai-verse, a rabbit hole I had vastly underestimated in terms of the sheer scale of it. Honkai Impact III will also mark the oldest gacha game I have reviewed so far, spanning across an impressive 7 years runtime at this point. You know the game is old when the miHoYo title card still says Tech Otaku saved the world. But does it still hold up to modern standards? My name is Psyche, and that's exactly what we'll find out. For a bit of disclaimer, I have never played Honkai Star Rail and I currently don't have plans to. Honkai Impact will be my first exposure to its universe. This game is developed by a small indie studio called miHoYo, originally only consisting of 3 college buddies in Shanghai, China. The representative of the group, Liu Wei, is now also the president of the company. It was started by himself and 2 other otaku friends. The name miHoYo, when spelled out, only has the letters H and Y as capital. In case you're wondering why this name came to be, this actually stems from the names of 2 of its founders. Aside from Liu Wei, 2 of its other founders are Cai Haoyu and Luo Yuhao. If you romanize the names, they both have the letters H and Y starting in it. At the time, because they thought that the biggest tech companies such as Google, Microsoft, and Facebook all had 2 O's in their name, they had to have it too. However, since Hoyo was already trademarked, the Mi was appended to the beginning, its name stemming from the popular Vocaloid idol Hatsune Miku. When they came up with Tech Otaku Save the World, they were not joking. The trio had computer science backgrounds and had a huge passion for otaku works. In 2011, their first self-published game, titled Fly Me to the Moon, which is of course an Evangelion reference, was released onto the App Store. The game featured a young witch, Kiana Castellana, as she flew upwards collecting gems and uncovering the secrets of her family. This game just needed a one-time payment to download with no microtransactions. 2011 truly was a different time for mobile gaming. This game is no longer offered on the App Store today and was by absolutely no means a smash hit. But it's quite interesting to see the early footholds they've had when dipping into the mobile market. The first major project, Houkai Gakuen, was a 2D side-scrolling brawler released in 2012, inspired by the popular manga series High School of the Dead. Half a year later in 2013, Houkai Gakuen 2, also known as Gun Girl Z, featured the iconic Kiana and her friends while battling zombies and extraterrestrials that became corrupted due to the influence of a mysterious power called the Honkai. Since most of the assets were already in place from the first game, the sequel expanded itself with new gameplay, characters, and items. But the 2D side-scrolling aspect remained. At the time, miHoYo had only expanded to 7 employees, and Gun Girl Z was turned into a free-to-play game with top-up microtransactions, as opposed to its predecessor. Given that it was the team's first exposure to a live service formula, they needed some people to work in customer service, since there were many instances of players not being able to receive the top-up packs that they paid for. At the time, Liu Wei himself acted as the sole customer service rep for a year, as he personally engaged with players that ran into issues with the game.
我在12年底到13年，其实我还做了1年的客服娘，就客服小妹。我觉得做客服给我最大的感受是，你每一个用户数据后面其实它不是一个数据，它是一个个鲜活的人呢。每个人都会有自己的需求，他会有自己的问题。那个时候你去跟他们聊天的时候，你才真正的感受到玩家的喜怒哀乐，你才真正会对玩家有同理心。
In an interview, it is even revealed that some of miHoYo's early employees were none other than the players that provided suggestions to the game itself. And Liu Wei, after I've seen a dozen interviews, comes off as an extremely charismatic person, almost like a Chinese Todd Howard, oozing with passion to create a good product and willing to prove himself to become better. He was given the nickname Dawei Ge, or translated into English, Big Brother Wei. He has even made cameos in his games. In Genshin Impact, there is an unusual hilichurl sporting the character kanji for Wei on its face. One of his attacks is throwing a F.O.M.O plushie, a recognizable icon of the Honkai games. And this hilichurl is voiced by none other than Dawei himself.
你
da la la ta da la da da nu nu da da mohe.
At the end of Gun Girl Z, the story concluded with the fitting line, "See you in the next world." Now, miHoYo's project after this one was one of the most ambitious for its time. Still with only 7 employees, they dreamed of bringing the Honkai universe to the 3D realm. With zero experience in creating 3D models, the team brute forced the initial creation of Kiana's character model after 6 months of work. The project started in 2014, and the initial game launch in Asia was in October of 2016. In 2018, the team will grow to an impressive 200 employees. We will continue the story of miHoYo when I eventually get to Genshin or Star Rail, but for now, let's dive into the game itself.
Captain on bridge.
Looking at the initial footage, we can all make fun of how horrendous the early chapter graphics or level designs are, but back in 2016, phones still looked like this. At the time, there really wasn't a market for 3D gacha games, even less for controls that historically needed a gamepad. You had your girls Frontline, you had your FGOs, but they were really contained within the 2D genre. No one knew just how big mobile gaming would become, and miHoYo took a pretty big risk with the development of Honkai Impact III, since some phones at the time couldn't even run it. But ultimately, this gamble paid off big. When you're a pioneer of a new product or idea, there's no proven track record that it will succeed. Much like the gamble they took with Genshin's open world genre, miHoYo proved that being the first comer to a new style can prove to be very profitable. It's because Honkai Impact III and Genshin that modern gacha games are looking into the 3D brawler or open world genres. For the record, I know that some of these developers are making the game in the same genre because they see the potentials for profit. But the thing is, because miHoYo has set such a high bar for production quality, anything that doesn't closely match its standards will be scrutinized, so game devs still have to make a good product before it has any chances of competing. During its years, Honkai Impact went uncontested as it was the pioneer of this new genre of gacha games. Its only real competitor would come 3 years later, which was Punishing Grey Raven by Krill Games. Funny how history repeats itself. Honkai Impact III is not necessarily related to Gun Girl Z, but it's in a way taken place in more or less the same universe. It features the same main cast, but just reimagined with different roles or abilities. It's kind of like how the Yakuza series relates itself to the spin-off game Ishin, where you know the characters share the same models and likeness, it's just reimagined in a different era. The lore was something I didn't expect to get so deep, but it did. Here's a brief rundown. Humanity has been at war with a mysterious force called Honkai. No one even knows where it came from or what kind of power it is, but its forces can manifest as Honkai monsters or even turn humans toward their influence. The war has been long fought, and the first major faction to lead the charge is a research institution called Shikso, creating super soldiers by the name of Valkyries. In the 1950s, the Honkai marked its first eruption and manifested its powers on a human with the name Welt, who will be known as the first Herrscher. In an attempt to control and harness the immense power of Herrschers, Shikso has attempted to research Welt in order to understand this mysterious source of energy, but was ultimately unsuccessful. After some disagreements, Otto, another prominent member of Shikso, decided to form his own organization called Anti-Entropy, who also fought the Honkai using mechanized robots instead of weaponized waifus in suggestive outfits, which was a poor choice to be sure. Shikso, up until the 21st century, have been secretly experimenting on children in an attempt to recreate the power of the Herrscher. Siren, enraged by the children's cruel treatment, was able to activate Herrscher abilities, who later would become known as the second Herrscher. During the second eruption, Siren was finally neutralized, but the battle would cost the lives of both of Kiana, the main protagonist's parents. A decade later, the main story begins at the Saint Freya Valkyrie Academy, featuring Kiana Kaslana, Raiden Mei, and Branya Zajic as the 3 primary characters of the cast as they work their way to become fully fledged Valkyries, and their journey to take the fight to the Honkai. To my surprise, the gist of Honkai Impact's lore is well documented in a series of YouTube infographic videos, created by none other than the official channel. Thank you, Dawei. Very cool. The entire works of the Honkai-verse spans across its 3 games, a visual novel, as well as a manga series that hopes to provide more context to some of the chapters. On the fandom side, there is a comprehensive list of the order of events that take place, and a recommended reading order across all mediums. It's genuinely pretty massive, looking at the total database for all the chapters, with enough lore to match the complexity to that of the Fate series. Surprisingly, aside from the previous Houkai Gakuen games, all manga materials are available for viewing in the game itself, hidden in a tab in the corner. In this game, you play as John Honkai, the captain in charge of the Hyperion battleship from Chickasaw. Your playable character doesn't have a face, and unfortunately I lied, because you're also not named John Honkai. The idea is that you lead the Valkyries into battle, but there's literally no avatar that represents the captain at all. Now, you might be wondering, okay, how does this game relate to Star Rail? Well, I never played Star Rail, but to my understanding, it's more or less a spin-off or an indirect sequel to Impact 3rd, just taking place in a different multiverse. There is a concept that is known as the Sea of Quanta in this game. It's basically like a system where timelines can diverge, and while different worlds take place in their separate universes, they are connected in some way. In fact, Genshin's Teyvat is one such branch in the Sea of Quanta. It is argued that it also takes place in the Honkai-verse.
In the final part of main story chapter 17, Overseer Otto observed other worlds via the imaginary tree. One of these observations is Dvalin, the wind dragon from Teyvat. The other would be Fallen.
Even the unknown god in the intro cutscene of Genshin can be argued as a manifestation of Kiana, passing off the torch of the protagonist role to either of the twins. But enough about Genshin. There is a separate standalone open world story mode called a Post-Honkai Odyssey, where you play as a male character? In my waifu collection game? Anyways, teaming up with Raiden Mei and Carol Peppers, you investigate the disappearance of Welt in this ruined city of sorts. The structure is more similar to an open world than a linear level, but to be honest, it still pales in comparison to Genshin's world design. Without spoiling too much, this mode is generally considered to be the closest connection as you're gonna get to Star Rail. As of June 2024, the game has been ported to PC and mobile globally with controller support. Surprisingly, this game is available on Steam and is the only one under miHoYo's handle here. But just be warned, I would not recommend downloading this version, as you cannot transfer your Steam data to your miHoYo-verse account, the same one you use for Genshin, Star Rail, or Triple Z. This is also the only miHoYo game not yet available on the miHoYo Play launcher, so you still have to download its individual launcher on the website. Unlike other miHoYo games, the Chinese server is one patch ahead of everyone else, so you do get a bit of clairvoyance to prepare your plans. The story of the game has concluded, with all chapters available to play. Each small arc is separated into their own chapters, and you don't even need to play the previous to unlock the next. You'll definitely feel a lot of jank in its writing or graphics in the first couple chapters, but given that it's the first of its genre and new for the development team at the time, some of it can be excused. Part 2 of the story recently launched earlier this year, featuring a brand new cast of characters with zero relations to Part 1. The protagonist follows the Dream Seeker, as she meets Sanadia, an entourage from another universe. The game engine was updated to use the same one that Star Rail uses, with its style changing from a linear story mode to open world. From a technical standpoint, Part 2 is absolutely a step up from its predecessor, giving you the ability to change the main menu layout and going into Part 2 content with the easy press of a button, with the dialogue boxes and character animations improved upon, which gives you an experience that's more akin to the more modern miHoYo games. Now, I'm all for novel ideas, but the launch of Part 2 was not universally well received from the player base. For one, some felt that the new cast was not good enough to fill in the roles of the OG roster. Though with the recent story quests, the impressions could change. miHoYo has a weird tendency of introducing hard-to-understand jargons in hopes of making the story sophisticated, but some feels it just ends up confusing players and causes a loss of interest in the lore overall. The sudden switch to an open world formula also feels like it's almost betraying the original vision of the game, not to mention that all recent content all featured the Part 2 cast, while the original are just never mentioned. When getting to late game content, the dungeon buffs favor the Part 2 characters, as if to shoehorn them to become more meta. Regardless of what you may think in terms of the story, there is a lot of content to discover. I often found that the story beats were more personal and simple than miHoYo's other works, since the Honkai-verse was their first major project, where they really wanted to expand the universe using characters that they built up for a while. This game has the narrative as its main focus, as opposed to Genshin's open world design. In terms of the story, I was able to get through what I could in a month, and while I don't judge a game by its story, I do have some things to say about it. First, the story actually gets pretty intriguing if you're able to make it past the early chapters, at least much more than I expected since the game seems to go hard on the fan service. The second thing that genuinely surprised me is that certain characters will die in the story. I've never bothered bringing this up before, but killing off a playable character in a gacha game is very ambitious. Don't confuse this with something like a character dying but coming back as an alternate form like Marion from Nikke, or literally any servant death from FGO. They do come back. It might not be a one-to-one copy, but my definition of a character being killed off is that they're gone for good. You can have them appear in flashbacks or prequels, but their death marks a definite end to their involvement in the story. The reason why this is ambitious is that you're basically locking away all future potential with that character. Considering that gacha games live and die by its characters, I imagine a decision like this would not be taken lightly. Just a side note, there are certain characters killed off in this game that do return in Star Rail. You could probably imagine the excitement some Honkai players felt. I went into this game with fairly simplistic expectations. Given that the original game launched in 2016, I expected the gameplay to be from a previous era. But no, there's actually quite a lot of meat here. You will assemble a team up to 3 Valkyries. You can switch between the 3 units, but unlike in Genshin, the swap function works independently for each unit. So while you can swap between all 3 almost instantly, they will be on cooldown for a while. When a condition is met, swapping to a character will trigger their QTE ability, such as if the enemy is in the air, has a status afflicted onto them, or if a time slow effect has taken place. The QTE ability can be activated if a unit's icon starts pulsating. You can dodge an attack and, when timed correctly, will trigger that Valkyrie's evasion skill, which does have a cooldown. You can still dodge, but the evasion skill just won't activate. Attacking or defeating enemies and collecting this orange orb thing will grant you SP, the gauge needed to unleash the Valkyrie's skill or ultimate. For Part 2 characters, there is a separate gauge that, when full, allows for an additional coordinated attack called Stellar Outburst. This can create some unique team rotations to take advantage while in this effect. Characters' kits are surprisingly deep, with skills changing depending on the timing or positioning. It's evident that some of the gameplay was inspired by the likes of God of War with the Devil May Cry series of games. There is even a tutorial section that teaches you the movesets of each character in case you want to use them well. Some characters feel so different that you have to rethink the way you play. By today's standards, this gameplay can seem pretty rudimentary from the surface, but at the time, designing a mobile game like this was considered experimental. In fact, playing on a PC likely won't pose too much trouble, but a major barrier to entry back in 2016 was that these touchpad controls hadn't been too widely used. So in addition to hoping that your phone could run the game smoothly to begin with, you had to learn to adapt to its controls. Some even stated that the game was simply too hard, and made it difficult for the genre to reach a wider audience. Compared to Genshin Impact's gameplay systems, Genshin is way easier to understand, and dodging is not necessary at all, which made it easy to pick up by more demographics of players. There is an element system where a type of class will deal a bonus 30% and take 30% less damage from another type. They are split into Psychic, who is advantageous towards Mechanized, who has advantage to Biological, who loops right back to Psychic. The other 2 types, Imaginary and Quantum, deal bonus damage to their own type but resisting the opposite. The new type introduced in Part 2, SD or Stardust, is advantageous towards itself but dealing neutral damage to everyone else. The type counters are not to be confused with Attack type, or something that's more akin to Genshin's element system, where a unit will deal either physical, fire, ice, or lightning damage. These attack types will be represented by the color of damage that they are dealt in. This is easily confused as any unit with any type can deal fire damage, for example. miHoYo has generously provided guides for all these gameplay features for each individual Valkyrie, including a gameplay video linked to their official channel, teams, and recommended gear. You can even see their specialization to see any similar units doing the same thing. Just a heads up, these guides can be pretty confusing if you get to the team synergy parts if you're a new player, since miHoYo loves to use the name of each attack instead of just calling it normal attack or ultimate or something. From here on out, I will be supplementing each section with the below, within, or above expectations rating, starting with progression. And this was one of the strangest experiences in gacha games I've had. The gameplay is oddly deep for a 2016 game, but the progression is extremely vague on what you're supposed to be doing. Part of me understands that old games has had many years to pile on new systems, but for a newbie in 2024, you're probably gonna have to do some research or some experimenting. For one, past some of the early chapters in the main story, you can't even use your own characters. The game just gives trial characters for you to use. It's not even optional, you literally just can't use your units. During some chapters, you will get currency that can be used to upgrade the featured characters for that story arc. So building a roster in this game is unnecessary if the story is the only thing you're interested in. Since the game literally gives you the required tools to clear story content, if you're unable to beat it, then people will unironically argue that it's a skill issue. I say this because the main campaign in a gacha game typically plays a big role in account progression. Since it's expected that the early story chapters are easy, but gets harder and harder as you learn about the mechanics and invest deeper into your roster. This is completely thrown out the window here. Of course, a meta does exist for this game, and just a heads up, power creep exists too. There are many other modes to test your abilities, but excluding the main campaign in this regard can confuse some new players. Valkyries are separated into A and S rank, with only the OG base characters being B rank. There is no level ascension mechanic, but their max level cap is the same as the player captain level, so it will increase naturally as you play more, but the upper level cap is 80. The star level can actually be limit broken using these fragments belonging to the same character in a process called evolution. They can be acquired through farming or pulling more copies of them in the gacha. Just be careful that the most recently released characters can only get their fragments from the gacha though, so don't think they're that lucky. Not only do you get increased stats, you even unlock new skills when evolution is done. Weapons range from, well, quite a number of types. There is cannon, crossbows, and even yo-yos? Anyways, weapon rarity ranges from 3 to 4 stars by default, but they can also be limit broken to increase the level cap and also the star rating. We will go over this later. You can get weapons by either crafting it or rolling for them in the gacha as equipment. When they reach a certain level cap, they can be limit broken to have its max level increased, ultimately resulting in a 5-star rarity at maximum. There's a bit more to weapons, but I'll leave it here. Stigmatas are essentially just artifacts. They are depicted by anime waifus with names originating from real historical figures like Marco Polo or Galileo. Not the first time a gacha game has done this, and it certainly won't be the last. They also range from 1 to 4 stars. Again, you can craft it or roll for them in the gacha. In this game, each unit can equip up to 3, and there are set bonuses when 2 or 3 belonging to the same set are equipped. The 3 slots are split into top, middle, and bottom, each giving different main stats. They can also have affixes, but luckily you can reroll them instead of leveling another one. When limit broken, their level will reset, and usually have to be leveled again. Every Valkyrie will have access to a variety of skills, and something I find quite pleasant is that there's no skill upgrade materials to farm. You just use the gold currency for everything. You even get a quick upgrade function to instantly max one out. I was wondering why the game gave so much gold, but all that will make sense when you see how much these skill upgrades will cost. For Part 2 characters, there is a special tab called the Astral Ring. This is unique to these characters because this is for activating the coordinated attack I mentioned earlier. In the menu called Astro Op is where you can upgrade this. By default, the additional character is the main protagonist of Part 2, though there is someone else that is unlocked later. I never got too deep into Part 2, but it's there. To avoid favoring the Part 2 characters, there is a separate slot for something called an elf, where it's almost the same thing, but it's a small chibi familiar that helps you out instead. Some Valkyries have the SP tag. I'm actually not 100% sure what it stands for. Maybe special. Anyways, these units are essentially welfares. They were added via events with its evolution currency given out as well. There is a separate tab that explains their bonuses when limit broken, and while the fragments for these characters are still available, limit breaking them is considerably more difficult now their respective event is over. The Battle Pass acts as both your daily tasks and actually has 3 tiers. 2 of them are paid. You get a discount if you upgrade straight to the tier 3 version, but not if you get the second tier and then upgrade that. I see what you're doing here, miHoYo. So generally with these progression systems, I don't have a problem if there's a paid Battle Pass. The issue here is that you're locking rewards behind 2 tracks instead of just 1. Not to mention that the pricing is listed in its own currency, which effectively translates to $10 and $20 respectively. When you claim the Battle Pass reward when not using the paid tracks, there will be a pop-up telling you of the rewards you missed out on. And you cannot disable this pop-up. I mean, look at all this cool stuff that you're missing. I bet you feel real stupid not giving your money to Dawei. So for the record, I want to make this very clear. This is predatory. It does slightly cross the line of what I consider to be acceptable ways to progress or monetize. All this can be a bit overwhelming, but there is a handy starter's manual that gives you a baseline of what you're supposed to be doing, while guiding you through the menus to the different game modes. That would have been the end of the progression section, but I am not done. There's two main criticisms I have regarding Honkai Impact III's progression. The first being the stamina system. Using the time replenished resource, which takes on the form of a suspiciously looking white fluid, you are able to go through the main story or farm various materials. Nothing strange here. The cap for stamina increases as you level up, and the game even lets you store a bit in reserve in the dormitory. Pretty generous, right? Genshin never did anything like this. Well, as you might surmise from your typical gacha game, when you run through a certain level gunning for resources, you expand stamina. The material farming section is actually separated by the date of the week, though all of them giving the same fluid alloy material needed for limit breaks. They all have their unique minigame, which I thought was pretty cool. But here's the kicker. You would think that as long as you have stamina to spend, you can farm this as much as you want. But no, you are limited to 1 attempt per day. If you wish to open another day's minigame or farm more, you have to use a token thing called Planoroids. XP chips for leveling Valkyries and twin soul crystals for leveling weapons are farmed separately. They also have a daily limit of 1 try. You may farm it again with Planoroid. The advanced skill material works the same way, it's just located in a different tab. 1 daily limit, Planoroids to play again. The fourth separate farm is for another currency, Astrite, which is available to farm up to 20 times in a week. I was actually pleasantly surprised that the quick farm feature does exist in this game, except they take on the form of booster tickets that are given out every week. You have a limit on how many times you can skip the farming. Separate from the material farming section, Expeditions is another tab where you can farm for fragments of characters and other stuff. You also have a limit of how many times you can run these every day. In the dormitory, you can send your Valkyries on timed missions to clear these while you're away, which is a nice touch. However, just be warned that doing expeditions this way also has a daily stamina cap. You are not allowed to just keep sending out your Valks. You can't exceed this amount of stamina spent per day using this method. You can spend stamina a few other ways like via the game's open world modes, but my first reaction when learning that there is even a cap on how much stamina I get to spend while farming was, so like, do you want me to play the game or not? I have never seen a game that stops me from farming materials like this before. Why does this mechanic exist? Who is it for? Honkai Impact III also has some of the most atrocious resource management I've seen in a gacha game. I hope the boosters and the Planoroid tokens and the upgrade materials didn't confuse you enough, because it's about to get worse. So, fluid alloy is used to upgrade past the limits of a weapon or stigmata, while a currency called crystal core is used to refine or reroll the effects of a stigmata itself. These can be obtained by salvaging your existing stigmatas. If we take a look at the Battle Pass rewards, a few of the resources rewarded will look similar, but this quickly opens the floodgate to so many other systems. By completing dailies, you get something called Time Structure, and you can spend this thing by buying more of this thing called Swirl Passes, which will get its turn later. To my understanding, you can spend it a few other ways, particularly raids, but I wasn't able to get into it. The Battle Pass also comes with its own currency in the Battle Pass shop called Honor Chips. Just be warned that these are only valid for the current version of the game and will expire. This is not to be confused with Sakura Crystallum, the second type of Battle Pass currency that lasts across multiple versions, and are used to purchase some rarer items, including new units altogether. Now, Ancient Willpower and by extension Ancient Legacy are two currencies gathered from another game mode and the Battle Pass used for a special shop called War Treasury, where you can exchange it for copies of different Valkyries. Einstein's Taurus is used alongside ST Metal to create and upgrade something called Prions. These are essentially the fully upgraded versions of certain weapons, where when they reach their level potential, can be further limit broken to change the appearance and its effects. Taurus is earned through the Battle Pass as well as the Astrite shop. Speaking of which, let's look into this. AE Imaginon is used for the initial crafting of weapons, while SS Imaginon for the crafting of stigmata. Not to be confused with Honkai Pieces, which is used to craft 3-star equipment specifically. Advanced skill material is for using alongside gold to unlock certain Valkyrie skills and elves, while Astral Terminals are used for upgrading the Astral Op characters specifically. This is not to be confused with Phase Shifters, a common upgrade material, and Honkai Shards, kinda like a more advanced version of the AE Imaginon. Now let's move on to stigmatas. Using the common crafting currency called ether fuel, you may craft certain stigmata sets when other material requirements are met. This is often used in conjunction of something called spatial lens or spatial convectron for the rarer types. Stigmata crafted in this regard ranges from its rarity from basic, then G1 to G4. The lens are used for the G1 and 2 variants, while convectron for the G3 and 4. While the higher Gs seem objectively better, and some even require the stigmata from the lower tier in order to convert them, some G1 stigmatas are still worth considering. Once you have these materials, you will now need to go to the separate dungeon mode called Universal Mirage, where you farm the crystallites ranging from G1 to G4 rarity, with the higher ones being more difficult to farm. Running a dungeon once will cost you an invite of Mirage, which you get 10 of every week. You also have the option to spend a number of time swirl passes to gain extra rewards, which is the one that you could use your time structures for. There are 4 types of crystallite gems in total. There are some miscellaneous materials needed for exchanges, such as ranger creds from joining an armada and making contributions of resources, and rusted insignia from the Elysian Realm, which is kind of like a roguelike game mode, because of course every gacha game needs to have one of those these days. Work points card from running errands from your dormitory is also used in the shop, which is more or less akin to Genshin's expedition system. Now, there's a couple more resources that I haven't even talked about yet, and I probably don't even understand them. But this system right here, not the most intuitive as you might imagine, for new players. This won't be that bad since you've had the time to slowly get introduced to them, but it is not newbie friendly in 2024. Due to the main campaign giving its own characters, the stingy stamina flexibility, and the extremely convoluted web of resources, I do have to give a below expectations rating for progression here. Alright, it's time to head back to the virtual casino because we're talking about the gacha system. Now, given that the main campaign gives trial characters, and I know this will get brought up by some people, if you don't care about collecting or just playing this for the story, then you can completely ignore this section. In case you're curious, here's how it works. Using the currency crystals, you can pull on the character or gear gacha. One pull costs 280, which, is a very obscure number. I used to complain about Genshin's 160, but 280 is slightly more odd to calculate. There will be one rate-up character. The base chance for an S-rank battlesuit is 1.5%. The pity is at 90 pulls, and unlike Genshin's system, there is no 50-50 mechanic. The rate-up SSR takes up the entire 1.5%. If you get an SSR, it is guaranteed to be the rate-up character. Now, before you start pumping your fists in excitement, this is miHoYo we're talking about, so I do have to rain on your parade a little bit. The free crystal economy in this game is, well, how do I put it? Not generous. Much like how I would describe Genshin's rates, I would describe it to be fair, but not generous. If we take a look at the top-up packs, low spenders are not going to like the rates here. When the $20 pack, even with the first purchase bonus, cannot afford a 10 pull, especially when it's tagged with the word value, I really have to press X to doubt. There is also the gear gacha, which encompasses both the signature weapon and the 3 stigmatas. Every 10 pull will guarantee a 4-star weapon or stigmata. There's a 2.487% chance for a 4-star weapon and a 14.586% for a 4-star stigmata. Just like the character gacha, there is no 50-50 system here. The rate-up weapon and stigmatas are the only 4-star level gear that can drop. However, just be warned that the 3 stigmata pieces do not have their individual pity systems. I've combed through all the menus to make sure of this, but the game does not explicitly say it will prioritize the stigmata pieces that you don't already have. Meaning, if you're unlucky and one of the 3 pieces doesn't drop, then you best keep rolling until it does. The weapon pity is at 60 pulls. The pity for both character and gear banners do carry over to the next, but there are other types of banners that either don't have a pity at all or the pity is not retained. These are the focus supplies, where you can wish for a specific stigmata to get a full set. But just be warned that the rates here are different. You can lose a 50-50 here, as the rate-up items only encompass 50% of the overall rates. Not only that, the rate-up chances themselves are different. The chance for a 4-star weapon is 4.958%, making the rate-up chance for the weapon a 2.479, which is slightly off from the equipment rate at 2.487. The rate for a 4-star stigmata is halved at 7.437%, down from the equipment supply's 14.586, with each of the rate-up stigmatas only having an individual 1.24% of dropping. However, every 10 pull will guarantee a 4-star equipment, and at worst, 50 pulls will guarantee 1 out of 4 of the rate-up items, making the absolute worst-case scenario 200 pulls for a copy of all 4. This full set guarantee only triggers once per focus supply and does not carry over to the next. This banner is generally considered not a good deal for most players unless you just really like suffering. The dorm supply is the standard banner, and the amount of crystals per pull is only 200, but it's not advised to spend your crystals here as you can get summon tickets for it, and the Valkyries here are mostly outdated. In other words, just don't get lured by the 30 pull guarantee like I did, because I am stupid. There is a starter banner that will guarantee 1 of 2 S-rank Valkyries in 90 pulls, with the banner period lasting for 90 days after you start your account. Yes, you're going to be rolling for this one for a while. Considering the stingy crystal economy, you're expected to play for a maximum of 3 months before getting full value out of this deal. I was going to talk about this in the progression section, but this game also has a 30-day welcome pack. The only issue is that it works slightly differently than what you might imagine. You can pay $5 to get 60 crystals a day for 30 days, but for every 15 cumulative login days, you get an additional 500. This means the total maximum you can get for this package is 1,800 from daily logins, then an additional 1,000 for 2 cumulative login periods for a total of 2,800. This is actually only enough for 1 10 pull. But the thing I want to bring your attention is the cumulative login mechanic. Again, I need to call these things out when I see it, but this is predatory. Diablo Immortal, the one and only game that people review bombed, had practices just like this one. The cumulative login feeds into the idea of FOMO, or fear of missing out, so even if you miss 1 out of 30 days, you're missing out on a whopping 500 crystals unless you buy another round of the supply. While the more modern 30-day supply packs, while you still miss out on a bit of resources, is nowhere near as bad as this. Aside from crystals, you can buy another premium currency called B-chips. Now you can kind of imagine these as the Genesis crystals from Genshin, but you can't convert the two here. B-chips are specifically used for certain item packages or buying the paid battle pass, because of course marking everything in real life money would make it too easy. Yes, you're likely going to have some B-chips as leftovers, and it's going to make you feel bad for it just sitting there, so it incentivizes you to top up again to buy more. And all of this is intended by design. Looking at all these systems, the 2 paid tracks from the Battle Pass, to the obscure pricing, to the FOMO-induced 30-day supply, it almost makes me falter in believing that they really did this to create their passion project. Are you sure you didn't meticulously put out these measures in place to monetize better? Honkai Impact III also differs from its more modern games, as the late-game challenge content will rank you against other players. This means because the primary endgame modes have that competitive element, the need to get those best-in-slot gear or stigmatas will increase. Plus, power creep exists, and while you can make the argument that waifu overpowers meta, the sad reality in this game is that there's no vast open world for you to explore, and you can't use your own characters in campaign stages. The frequency to show up your built-up favorites is quite limited, meaning meta will play a bigger role in the long term versus other gacha games. I'll say the exact same thing as I did in my Tower Fantasy video. The question here is to not ask, is this game pay to win? And instead to ask, can you, at all, make the argument that it could be pay to win? Now granted, the rewards for ranking high in the leaderboard is more or less for bragging rights, and there's no direct PvP mode. For the record, if I see a gacha game copy Genshin's pull rates or monetization, even if it's like a complete carbon copy, I would be fine with it. There's a reason why it's the standard for most games. The gacha economy is not generous, but it's fair. The Welkin system provides some more income for low spenders that doesn't induce as much FOMO as this one. Battle Pass is priced in dollars with 1 premium track, Weapon Gacha with the artifact system completely farmable in-game. This game, however, pulled out so many mechanics and systems to monetize. In the first couple copies of the script, I actually wanted to give this section a below expectations rating. The thing is, I don't want a developer to look at Honkai Impact and think, yeah, let's monetize our game this way. I know at the time, miHoYo was still experimenting with the mobile market, and I'm glad that the monetization was something that was improved upon with the later entries. I'll brute force a within expectations about this one, but just know that I had second thoughts. As you might imagine, miHoYo being the pioneers of this new genre of mobile games, there was a lot riding on the way the game was presented. The issue with some of these older games is that the graphics may not age well over time. I mean, I certainly had a laugh when it came to taking in those 2016 graphics. But it is something that will improve in the later chapters. Most of the story is presented in a visual novel style format, except the models are 3D, which was quite innovative for its time. The story is voice acted in Chinese and Japanese, so no English dub here. The cutscenes were mostly in animated static images, but here's the big one. During the end of most story chapters, there is a fully animated cutscene that moves the story along. miHoYo has always been known for their animations, and when these douche come up, they look incredible. In fact, if you go through the entirety of the main campaign, you get a roadmap of miHoYo's journey from being rookies in the mobile market to the era post-Genshin and Star Rail. At some point, characters start to have old animations. In Part 2, you can noticeably see the characters have more polygons, and their animations are on par with the newer games. Even with the standalone open world modes, you can get a feel of their first steps designing something that would later become Genshin. Sure, it looks pretty rudimentary here, but everyone has to start somewhere. The game is currently on version 7.5. It's had over 7 years of runtime at this point, and many elements, including the UI, have been revamped over the times. There's quite a number of shortcut keys that make things considerably easier, like the quick upgrade feature that auto-selects the materials needed to max out a skill or piece of gear, even after limit breaks. Stepping into Part 2 content, it feels like a completely separate game, with none of the formula from the original and its influences in both story writing and quality matching their newer titles. If you take a look at the grand market for 3D gacha games, the players in that market are not actually that many. Going from 2D to 3D is a drastic choice, since you have to pay attention to certain factors, such as characters' facial animations and movements. But even now, 7 years into the success of Honkai Impact 3, not that many devs try to go down this route. There's going to be some competitors trying to enter the market in this or next year, but you can probably count with your fingers the amount of 3D gacha games existing today. I like it when games try ambitious things, and this game at its prime was very much that. Presentation gets an above expectations rating from me. This section is usually where I'm the least certain in every review. 1 month in, you can't really expect a player to have hands-on experience with late-game challenge content. In Honkai Impact 3, there are 2 main modes that players consider as late-game. Q Manifold, which is basically just the Abyss system akin to that of Genshin, where you battle 10 floors, and if you clear the 10th and final boss floor under a certain time frame, you are moved to the next bracket upon the next rotation. Every rotation is only 2 days, meaning your score is evaluated 3 times a week. You will either remain at your current floor or get dropped or moved up if you perform well. This means if you wish to stay competitive in this mode, you will have to challenge the dungeon at least once every 2 days. I'm sure there's a lot of details I'm missing. The expectation is that it works almost the same way as Genshin's Abyss system. But there is a leaderboard, and your rewards will be different depending on if you make the higher level brackets or not. The second late game mode is called Memorial Arena. It's kind of like a boss rush mode where you can battle bosses to score points. Each boss rotation changes every week, so again, depending on if you score well or not, you will move to the next bracket. The caveat here is that you can only select certain Valkyries for one specific boss, meaning if there are 2, then you will need 6 total units or 2 teams. The later brackets will have 3 bosses, so 3 teams will be required. Just like Infinite Abyss, there is a ranking system here too. Just a heads up, even if you're not interested in this mode, this is where you get the ancient willpower and legacies needed in the War Treasury shop, the same one where you can exchange for new characters. So if you want an income of free characters, you better get on those bosses. Just another heads up, power creep exists, and the game is currently favoring Part 2 characters. I overall don't have a problem with this type of late game content. If I were to be in it for the long haul, I would probably just try to get on a decent ranking and just be done with it. To my understanding, you can compete in the upper echelon brackets if you have enough skill or time invested. But usually in games running for long times like this, you will have to compete with long-term whales. Late game content gets a within expectations rating from me. The game has been out for more than 7 years. I'm sure it's had a lot of great events and stories over that period. My question is, if a player starts today, can they still experience any of that? How does the game handle F.O.M.O elements? Well, let's establish what is actually limited first. The first being outfits or skins. They were available during certain events or campaigns, and to be completely fair, I did see a bunch of returning outfits in the shop, but you do have to pay crystals to get them, so you ain't getting off that easily. I've also found some outfits that haven't come back since, like this summer skin of Fuhua. Released all the way back in August of 2021, this outfit has not had a rerun since. The game also has a long list of released characters, with most of them being outdated, though they did have the decency to add them to either the dorm supply, the war treasury, or farmable via fragments. The main thing I'm looking for, as you might imagine, surmised from Genshin's track record, is event reruns. And the answer is... yes, reruns exist. I know, right? Reruns in my miHoYo game? Honkai Impact puts a lot of stock into its narrative elements. Even if considering that events don't return, a few of the most important ones are added as permanent features, like the open world modes, the Elysium Realm where you play as Raiden Mei through a roguelike dungeon with a fully voice-acted storyline. You might imagine from a 7-year-old game, there is a lot to explore here. I'm willing to give miHoYo a pass here, but I won't be so forgiving when Genshin eventually gets its turn. Lastly, we will take a look at the variety and the frequency in which content is updated. Now, miHoYo has always had a good track record when it came to content patches. In fact, I think they also pioneered the staple update cycle of once every 6 weeks. This has also been the case with Honkai Impact III. To my surprise, looking at the version history, there was almost a new story chapter every patch. Now with Part 2 released, all the events so far have been focused on the new cast. I was able to play some of the 7.5 event minigames, and just like in miHoYo fashion, you basically do these short levels to get rewards. You don't need an established roster or anything. I personally think this is how events should be. They should be accessible to players of all types. Even if some events require a built-up roster, the majority of rewards should not be locked behind it. But given that this is still miHoYo we're talking about, don't expect developer responsiveness on the same level as some other gachas out there. I don't have too much to say regarding this. I think there's a reason a lot of gacha games follow miHoYo's content scheduling formula. 6 weeks is enough for a couple of 2-week events thrown in here and there, new characters, new stories, enough time to go through them casually but also reminding people to return for the next patch. This section gets a within expectations rating, because in terms of consistency, miHoYo has always been the top of their game. To hammer it home, Honkai Impact III was the golden goose, the lightning in the bottle that this small indie studio needed to jumpstart their legacy on the gacha market. Researching their background did make me quite fascinated with their history. And seeing the success of this game, I think it was well deserved. Part of me still questions their decisions for monetization or retention, but I think what hardly anyone will question is the game's ability to grow and evolve over time, while creating a new universe that would end up becoming colossal in its scale, spanning across multiple games. The thing is, if you currently play other miHoYo games and want to give this a shot, and you're only in it for the story, then just ignore everything I said regarding its gacha or progression. I personally picked up this game because I wanted to know more about the Honkai universe, so I didn't mind the story almost being its standalone mode at all. Other than that, I could see that the game has been improving over the years because the UI, the quality of the character models, the world designs still hold up quite well. In 2024, I would say this is a solid 7 out of 10 game. Lots to explore, lots to learn about the Honkai-verse. Personally, I will actually be going through this game's story leisurely, as I think it's been pretty good so far. And simply for that reason, I'm in. Thank you for tuning in to the 6th volume of the Atrocious Gacha Reviews. This video spiraled out of control on its length, but I had a lot of fun making it. I'm also pretty curious to see where this indie studio goes from here. I'm thinking maybe something like an open world gacha game, something no one has seen before, like something akin to Breath of the Wild. Wouldn't that be pretty cool? The next review probably won't be for a while, as it's one that's likely to exceed the length of this one. But if you don't want to miss it, you know what to do. And always remember, have fun out there.